Welcome back into Florida Live. I'm Garrett Weimer, and thanks for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon, live on Fox Local and on YouTube. A federal judge has approved a settlement between the House and the NCAA, which allows colleges now to directly pay players, college student athletes. Schools, there are a couple of nuances to this, and I'll just list a couple here, and that's that schools have a max of $20.5 million to share with athletes, and all NIL deals over $600 will have to be registered with a clearinghouse called NIL Go. So will this provide the stability and consistency and answers to some questions that the sport needs, that the industry of college athletics needs, or will it open the door to more problems? Joining us live now to talk about all of this and break some of this down for us is Christy Dosh, who is the founder of the Business of College Sports and an adjunct professor at the University of Florida as well, not to mention the author of The Athlete's NIL Playbook, The Complete Guide to Owning and Profiting from Your Name, Image, and Likeness, a book that was just published, and as I understand it, Christy, published early because of all of this going on, so certainly a timely topic to be writing about.
Yeah, it has been interesting timing for this with the book, and I'm in Orlando at the NACTA convention, which is all of the athletic directors in Division One, and so we've all been here talking about this for days.
So a lot to talk about. First, just give me your reaction to the settlement and kind of what has come out from this, and what you think it may mean.
Yeah, we've known about the broad strokes of this settlement for months now. We were just waiting for the judge to give it final approval. It looks very much like we expected. There's $2.8 billion of back pay to previous student athletes and even some current student athletes who were active prior to the new NIL rules that went into effect in 2021. So that's one piece of it. And then you've got revenue sharing going forward. Like you mentioned, it's $20.5 million per team. They can decide where to be in that. You don't have to share the full 20.5. You can share less than that, but that's the ceiling. And you alluded to whether there are going to be future problems. That ceiling is a potential future problem, but the rest of it very much looked like we expected. The timing is a little different with the clearinghouse. I think folks believed they would have until July 1st for that to begin. And in fact, deals struck as of June 7th have to be entered into the clearinghouse. And I believe it just went live today. So that came a little earlier than expected.
When you talk about the clearinghouse, we've seen some reporting. I saw some reporting in The Athletic, some other places that some officials may have some doubts about how effective that whole kind of part of this process may be. What are you hearing and what do you think?
I've heard a lot of administrators here this week say, well, who's going to make sure that athletes disclose these deals? Because a lot of schools already had rules in place that athletes had to disclose their NIL deals directly to the school over the last 4 years. And they tell me that they think 5 to 20% of athletes actually turned in those disclosures. And so I decided to go to the athletes, and I texted about a dozen athletes yesterday, small sample size, but they're all at Power 4 institutions. They're all high earners. And I said, have you ever heard of NIL Go? And I didn't give them any other context. And none of them had any idea what I was talking about. When I said, hey, it's where you've got to disclose your deals over $600, one came back and told me that she had heard that that was going to happen. The rest are totally unaware of it. And so there's going to be a lot of education for athletes coming up this summer.
There's been a lot of talk over the past couple of years about the transfer portal, about transfers in college athletics. Does something like this, where you may effectively be able to have some contracts with these players, will that impact that? Will that slow down some of those moving parts in the transfer portal that we have seen the past few years?
It could. Schools could offer multi-year contracts and try to lock players in longer, but we haven't actually seen very many of those. I've seen quite a few revenue sharing contracts. I've been talking with other attorneys who are here this week about the ones they've seen. We have seen very, very few that are multi-year contracts, but that would be an option to try to lock players in. Would there still be ways for them to get around it? Potentially, you could have buyouts like you have in a coach's contract. So maybe that's what we'll see coming. This first year, I think, is going to be a little rocky as everybody figures out what works best.
The big money makers often are football and basketball. What does something like this mean for some of those other sports that maybe aren't that high profile, that aren't raking in that much cash?
We are seeing schools decide to share revenue with other sports, women's basketball. I know of some schools that are sharing with volleyball, softball. I've seen men's ice hockey at a school. So it's completely different from one school to the next. We certainly expect that the bulk of the money is going to go to football and men's basketball, which probably raises some Title IX lawsuit issues. And in fact, I just saw before we got on that we already have a case filed on a Title IX issue. So I would imagine there will be more of those coming. But I also think it'll be interesting to see there are roster limits that are part of this settlement as well. Many of those roster limits are below the average roster size that sports currently carry. And that's true even for football. So, for example, some football teams might have a roster last year that was 150 athletes. Well, they're now going to have a roster limit of 105. And so you actually, I think, might see talent disperse a little bit because the schools at the top aren't going to be able to hoard all the best players because of the new roster limits.
You mentioned some of the potential legal challenges. We're not done seeing this with this. This certainly isn't settled. What do you think? Where do you think things go with some of those challenges, whether it's Title IX, whether it's some other areas?
There are outstanding challenges that weren't solved by this lawsuit. This lawsuit settled three lawsuits that were outstanding, but there are others about antitrust, labor and employment law, Title IX, you name it. Those still exist, and more are going to continue to be filed and potentially even filed about the settlement itself, whether it's Title IX or it's over the opportunities that are being taken away with the roster limits, issues with the cap itself. Even the judge in this case sort of looked at the antitrust issue with there being a cap and said that she didn't have enough information to decide if it was a problem. So she was going to go ahead and approve the settlement. But we could very quickly see a challenge to the cap itself. And people always say, but there's caps in professional sports. There are, but those are collectively bargained by the athletes because they're employees. And we don't have that in college sports.
Still very much shifting ground here. And so, what's the main impact at this point, right now, for student athletes here in Florida?
Yeah, here in Florida, we now have high school at the NIL level. In fact, I was just meeting this morning with some folks who educate high school athletes here in Florida about their NIL and teach them personal branding earlier on so that by the time they get to college, they have that ability to earn on their NIL because the revenue sharing is just one piece of this pie. We still have NIL, which started 4 years ago. It's still going strong. We see new brands come into this space every single day. And that is a place where we see Olympic athletes who maybe aren't going to be getting revenue sharing still earning significant sums of money from brand deals for social media. They make money on public speaking. I know an athlete who wrote a book who sold over 10,000 copies of her book. There are so many ways that athletes can monetize, and those aren't going away. They're only going to continue to grow.
What's next on this front that we should be watching for as things continue to evolve?
Oh, yeah. As we go into this first school year with revenue sharing, it'll be interesting to see how schools manage it. Who do they choose to give the money to? How much do they give here at the beginning versus waiting for the transfer portal to open? Because if you give it all here at the beginning, you've got to wait till July 1st of 2026 before the amount replenishes again and you can go up to that ceiling once again. So cap management, as they're calling it, is going to be really key this first year.
We also expect Congress to potentially act on some of these issues as well. So who knows what kind of all that might bring.
I do not expect Congress to act. They have had a number of bills over the last 5 years related to NIL. Not a single one has ever made it out of committee. So I really do not expect anything on that front.
Okay, so one less thing to worry about there, I guess. Well, Christy Dosh, the founder of the Business of College Sports, an adjunct professor at the University of Florida, also the author of the Athlete's NIL Playbook, the complete guide to owning and profiting from your name, image, and likeness. And Christy, I would say it's safe to say that you will have plenty of material for a second edition very, very soon.
Yes, thankfully it's not outdated yet, but hopefully it'll hold for a little while.
All right. Well, Christy, really appreciate you joining us this afternoon here on Florida Live.
Thanks for having me.